Japan is known for its ultra-strict trash rules. Entire booklets explain how to wash, sort, and label every bit of waste, from bottles to batteries. Tourists are stunned. Foreigners living there often get it wrong. But here's the part no one talks about. Most of that perfectly sorted garbage, it still gets burned. Yep. After all the rinsing, bundling, and separating, a huge chunk of it is tossed into an incinerator. And not just in remote industrial zones, some of these waste plants are nestled right next to schools, gyms, and parks. Even more shocking, Japan considers this recycling. So what's actually going on here? Is this some genius solution to the world's waste crisis? Or just an elaborate greenwashing act dressed up in clean efficiency? Let's take a deep look at one Japanese city that quietly does something the rest of the world barely understands, and figure out if Japan's trash system is the future, or a fraud hiding in plain sight. When people think of Japan's waste system, they picture order, discipline, and near-perfect recycling rates. You might have even heard that famous stat, Japan recycles 81% of its waste. Sounds impressive, right? But here's the twist, that number is wildly misleading. It comes from one town, not the whole country. And that recycling figure? It often includes incineration. In Japan, burning trash to create energy is legally considered a form of recycling. It's called thermal recycling, and it makes up the majority of how waste is processed nationwide. So while Japan does require residents to separate their trash down to the tiniest detail, what happens afterward isn't always what you'd expect. In fact, in many cities, plastic waste doesn't even make it to a recycling center. It's just burned. And it gets more complicated. Waste collection isn't run by Japan's national government. It's handled city by city. That means what's true in Tokyo might be totally different in Osaka or Saga. So let's zoom in on one of those cities, Saga, a place that's doing things by the book, and sometimes rewriting it entirely. But what makes Saga's approach so different? And why might it be the blueprint or the warning sign for Japan's waste future? Saga City might look like any other quiet town in southern Japan, but underneath the surface, it's running one of the most organized and controversial waste systems in the country. Let's start with the basics. Residents are required to use city-issued plastic garbage bags. And they're not just ordinary bags, each one has printed instructions, showing exactly what you can and can't throw away. Some bags even include space for your name and collection area. Sounds extreme? There's a reason. That came from a request by residents. One person had neighbors who kept messing up the sorting, and waste collection groups, small community clusters of households, wanted a way to hold people accountable. So while you're not forced to write your name on the bag, peer pressure makes it hard to ignore. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Most plastic, anything that's not a PET bottle, is lumped into a single category called pura. In Saga, all pura goes into the burnable garbage, not mechanically recycled, not chemically processed, just burned, but not in a dump or open flame. Saga uses waste-to-energy incineration. It's high-tech, hyper-monitored, and designed to do more than just destroy garbage. It powers an entire ecosystem. Garbage trucks roll in throughout the day, dumping waste into a massive pit. Operators don't know exactly what's coming or when, so they mix everything using a giant crane claw, like a real-life UFO catcher game. This creates a consistent burn mix, which is crucial for the next step, incineration. That burn generates extreme heat, which boils water, creating steam that spins a turbine to generate electricity. The leftover heat? It's piped next door to a local sports complex, warming the pools and buildings. The entire place is powered by trash. Sounds genius, right? But there's a catch, and it starts with CO2. Let's talk about plastic, because this is where things get murky fast. In Japan, household plastic is split into just two categories: PET, like drink bottles, and pura, which is basically everything else. From packaging and containers to random plastic bits, it all falls under pura. And in Saga, all of it is burned. Now here's the twist. They don't do this because they can't recycle. They do it because burning pura provides fuel for the incinerators. Since plastic is made from oil, it burns hot and steady, perfect for keeping the incineration system running efficiently without using extra fossil fuels. This process is called thermal recycling. Sounds eco-friendly, right? But it's a hot-button issue. Critics say burning plastic under the label of recycling is just greenwashing. It lets cities avoid tougher questions like, why not actually recycle more? Or why not reduce plastic in the first place? And they've got a point, because Japan's system, for all its precision, still relies heavily on incineration rather than real circular reuse. That said, Saga is starting to shift. A new national law, the Act on Promotion of Resource Circulation for Plastics, is pushing cities to separate more plastic from burnable waste. But don't expect an overnight change. For now, Saga continues burning most of its pura, just with slightly more oversight. So what about PET bottles, the one plastic that actually is recycled? These are separated early and go through a different recycling stream. But when it comes to the mountain of other plastic waste Japan creates every day, the uncomfortable truth is this: most of it still goes up in flames. When you picture a waste incinerator, you probably imagine smokestacks, pollution, and something you'd want far away from where you live. But in Saga, that couldn't be further from the truth. The city's waste facility looks more like a high-tech energy plant than a trash-burning monster. And it kind of is. Every day, garbage trucks roll in, unloading an unpredictable mix of waste into a massive pit. There's no way to know exactly what's in there, just estimates based on seasons or holidays. So how do they burn it all efficiently? It starts with a giant crane, operated like a real-life arcade claw machine. It mixes the trash to create a balanced fuel source. From there, the waste gets dropped into a massive furnace where it's burned at high temperatures. The heat? It boils water. That steam? It spins a turbine. And that turbine generates electricity. This one plant helps power local facilities, including a sports complex next door that's fully heated using the leftover steam. Water heated by the plant runs in a loop to the gym, pool, and even a foot bath, then returns to be reheated. That's not just waste disposal, it's energy reuse in action. And there's more. Saga's incinerator is the first in the world to capture CO2 directly from waste burning. Not to save the planet exactly, but to sell the gas to local businesses via pipeline. The system isn't profitable yet, and they only capture about 5% of total CO2 emissions, but it's a start. Still, don't get it twisted, not all emissions are caught, and the plant doesn't store CO2 long-term. Countries like Norway are going way further, planning to store emissions miles beneath the seafloor. Japan's system? It's innovative, but it's not perfect. Bottom line, the Saga incinerator is more than a waste disposal site. It's a mini power plant, a heating source, and a testbed for futuristic carbon capture. But it also highlights Japan's tricky balance between technology, convenience, and sustainability. On paper, Japan's waste-to-energy system looks brilliant. Burn trash, make electricity, heat the local pool, and shrink landfill space. But here's where things get complicated, because not everyone's convinced this is the green solution it claims to be. Let's start with the critics. Many environmentalists argue that incineration creates a demand for waste. To run efficiently, these facilities need a steady stream of trash. That means there's less incentive to reduce waste at the source or push harder for composting and recycling. In fact, critics say that the very existence of these plants undermines the efforts to build a true circular economy. Then there's the CO2 problem. Even with Saga's small-scale carbon capture project, most emissions still go straight into the atmosphere. Ironically, burning trash produces more CO2 per unit of energy than burning coal, oil, or gas. Yes, it releases less methane than a landfill, but compared to recycling or composting, incineration falls short in the emissions game. Another issue? Toxic byproducts. Burning waste leaves behind two types of ash. One, bottom ash, which is considered relatively safe and sometimes reused in construction. 2. Fly ash, which is filled with harmful chemicals and needs to be chemically treated before being landfilled. Even with Japan's strict environmental controls, this stuff has to be handled with extreme care. And if it's not, it's dangerous for both people and the planet. Still, supporters argue that in a country like Japan, where land is scarce and recycling certain materials isn't always feasible, incineration makes sense. It drastically reduces the volume of waste, can generate clean-looking energy, and supports urban infrastructure without the eyesore or smell you'd expect from traditional dumps. But here's the core question. Is waste-to-energy a clever compromise or a distraction from real sustainability? Because if you're counting on constant trash to fuel your system, are you solving the problem or just making it look cleaner? Japan isn't alone in using waste-to-energy plants, but it might be one of the few countries where these facilities sit next to sports centers, schools, and public baths. That says something about public trust. In places like the US, NIMBYism, not in my backyard, keeps incinerators pushed far from residential zones, often into low-income communities. Japan, by contrast, blends them into city life, turning what's normally seen as pollution into a public utility. But globally, the picture's more divided. In Scandinavia, countries like Sweden and Norway have invested heavily in waste-to-energy, but they're also aggressively recycling and storing captured carbon underground. Norway's upcoming plant plans to store 90% of its CO2 emissions under the North Sea, a far cry from Saga's modest 5% capture rate. Meanwhile, many environmental groups worldwide are calling for a full stop on incineration. They argue it's a flashy tech band-aid for a deeper wound, our addiction to producing waste. And until there's a system that rewards reducing, reusing, and truly recycling, any energy you get from trash might come at a higher environmental cost. So what's the takeaway here? Japan's system, especially in places like Saga, is organized, efficient, and surprisingly community-centered. But even the most advanced technology can't dodge the big question: are we managing waste better, or just getting better at hiding it? In the end, waste-to-energy might not be the villain or the hero. It's a stopgap. A clever, imperfect answer to a problem we still haven't solved at the root. So, after everything we've seen, what do you think? Is Japan's waste system a model of smart engineering, or just a polished version of the same global problem? Saga's story shows us something rare: a city trying to balance public health, energy needs, and environmental responsibility, all while staying honest about the trade-offs. But it also raises bigger questions, like, are we truly recycling, or just feeling better about burning our trash? These aren't easy answers, and honestly, maybe that's the point. The more we dig into how the system works, the more we realize how much still needs fixing. If you've lived in Japan, or even just visited, what was your experience with the waste system? Did it surprise you? Frustrate you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everything, and I'd love to know what you think. And hey, if you found this video eye-opening, hit that like button so more people see it. Subscribe for more deep dives into how the world really works, and how it sometimes doesn't. Thanks for watching. See you next time.